Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first bilateral meeting after having taken oath for the third term, and he has in fact met the French President Emmanuel Macron. This is, like I said, the first bilateral. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived early morning Indian Standard Time in Italy, in Puglia, where the 3-day G7 summit is taking place, and he has met with French President Emmanuel Macron. Akshat on the telecast with me. Akshat, if you could shed more light into what could be the discussion points between the two leaders during this bilateral.
Well, yes, as we know that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is now in Italy to attend the G7 summit, and the sidelines of the summit, French President Emmanuel Macron is now meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the G7 summit in Italy. And of course, a plethora of topics can be discussed in this bilateral meeting which Prime Minister Modi is holding. And also very importantly, I just tell you, that foster better ties between France and India, and to foster international cooperation. These talks are taking place. If I also tell you that what we are getting to know about engagements of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, then he will also be meeting UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak today only, and will be meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi in G7 summit, and very importantly, of course, energy, renewable energy, climate change, migration are issues which are going to be a part of the discussion.
Yeah, the Prime Minister also spoken about taking the voice of Global South at the G7 summit, which is largely, let's face it, going to talk about the Ukraine war, where there have already been sanctions imposed on Russia by the United States of America ahead of the meeting that was that started off yesterday.
Yes, of course, he has time and again spoken about the voice of the Global South, and we of course have seen the replication of it in the G20 summit also. And when we talk about the larger agenda of the Prime Minister this time, then it's also the focus will be on artificial intelligence. Also, a joint session will be by the leaders of these where these issues will be discussed. And yes, you guys talked about how India's G20 presidency also took up the issue and deliberated on the South.
Right. In fact, Akshat, we have these first visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has now met Emmanuel Macron, and he has hugged and shaken hands with the French President. And the two nations, France and India, share a symbiotic relationship and very cordial association with each other. There had been the Rafale deal that had been a successful venture between the two countries. There are another tranche of Rafales that are going to be arriving in India in the coming months. And Akshat, that forms the basis of this very warm, cordial association between the two nations.
Well, yes, you are correctly right, because a lot of trade is happening with India, and that's also emblematic of the fact that how the role of India is growing on the global level when we talk about the geopolitics of it. And Prime Minister Modi himself, departing for the G7 summit, talked about that he looked forward to meeting other world leaders and discussing a wide range of aimed at making planet better and improve the people. So it's also that how he is also working to reflect of the people-to-people tie, and very importantly, how he will enter in infusing momentum and depth in the bilateral agenda of the countries.
Right, absolutely, and those are visuals, and there are going to be more and more of these bilaterals. There are at least 4 of them that have been lined up. And the Prime Minister's schedule is jam-packed, because after this there is going to be a bilateral with the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He is also going to be meeting the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. It is being speculated that the Prime Minister is most likely to have a bilateral with the US President Joe Biden as well. Of course, he is going to be meeting his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni, who has sent a special invite to the Prime Minister to be part of the G7 summit. Thank you, Akshat, for giving us those details. All right. It is day 2 of the G7 summit. The other G7 members had already arrived in Italy, in Puglia, where this event is taking place yesterday, after which there was a strong decision that had been taken by the G7 member nations to provide a loan, a multi-billion-dollar loan to Vladimir Zelensky to fight the forces of Russia in the midst of this war that has gone on for more than a year now. Professor Madhav Nalapat on the telecast with me. Professor Nalapat, the Prime Minister has arrived at the G7 summit. The first bilateral he has is with Emmanuel Macron, the French president.
Yes, I think the French president, as France has historically been very close to India for a long time, and France has been one of the key weapon suppliers to the Indian armed forces. And, the major deals, such as the Rafale deal, have been signed with French companies. So there is also, Macron is now, frankly, after the EU elections, it's very clear his popularity is slipping.
Yeah.
The only way he can recover is to ensure that there is a significant improvement in the economy. And one way of that would be the ramping up exports of defense items. So I think President Macron would be looking very much at India as a potential future customer for such exports. And as a consequence, I am not surprised at all that the very first bilateral meeting has been with President Macron, who is a very important leader within the G7, and whose party has done badly in the EU election, but he has taken a very bold step of announcing parliamentary polls, and if he comes back to power, in the sense of his party getting a majority in those polls, his position will be strengthened.
Yeah,
whereas
absolutely.
now the EU elections have basically cost him a certain amount of credibility in terms of popularity. So he would like to boost that popularity, and he sees India as a very reliable trade and commercial partner. So from that point of view, I think there's no question that this should be a very important meeting for President Macron.
Absolutely. Talking about the defense deals, and you rightly mentioned the Rafales, 36 of them that have already arrived in India, and now there is a second tranche of Rafales, which is the marine deal, that is also going to be implemented, executed in the coming months. Are there more talks right now of also the Scorpions being introduced into the Indian armed forces? Now, do you think if there is a change of guard, if there is a new president of France that is elected after the snap polls, the association between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his counterpart would be any different?
I don't think so. In the United States, Prime Minister Modi has had very collaborative relationships with Obama, then with Biden, and with Trump, all three. Very different presidents. So I don't see that there will be any problem if there's a change of guard. But it's very unlikely that President Macron will resign from his position as president, even if his party does disastrously in the coming polls. That poll is a very bold decision on his part to tell the French people, do you want the hard right or do you want me? And if they choose the hard right, of course, he will have lost that particular gamble. But having said that, I don't see, frankly, any situation in which he is going to step down. The point is that it's very important to ensure that that Rafales are made in India. And if they are made in India, if, for example, the transfer of a lot of production facilities to India, well, the much more Rafales would be sold across the world.
Right.
Because making in India is very much cheaper than making the same high-performance, excellent aircraft in France.
Right, absolutely. Now talking about, the overarching theme of G20 summit, the 50th G20 summit that is taking place right now in Italy, it is of course the Ukraine-Russia war that is looming large. There has already been a 50 billion tranche loan that has been announced after the first meeting that took place between the G7 leaders yesterday. Now, amidst all this, the Prime Minister has spoken about taking the voice of Global South to all these leaders, to the G7 summit. How does this play out?
Look, the Global South has frankly not done what the West wanted it to do, which was to support the Western alliance in its campaign against Russia. I had predicted in 2022 itself, even on NewsX, that this particular move by the West is going to be disastrous for the political leaders who have been taking part in the decisions that have involved this full support, financial support to Ukraine. President Biden is being asked, for example, by the African American community, you are showering money on Ukraine, and at the same time, tens of millions of our people are homeless. So where is your priority? Every single leader who has basically been very enthusiastic about showering money with Ukraine, whether it's Olaf Scholz, I'm sorry to say, whether it's Macron, whether it is the Prime Ministers of Britain, Johnson, then Liz Truss, and now Sunak, every leader of every country in Europe and North America, including Justin Trudeau of Canada, by the way, that has basically just spent so much of money on Ukraine, basically in their bid to try and weaken Russia. I think the voters are giving them a reply one by one, and some of us have predicted this way back in 2022. Those predictions are coming true now. And Prime Minister Modi, let him be congratulated. He has wisely kept away from that. I don't believe there's going to be high-level representation at the so-called Ukraine summit in Geneva. The Swiss have destroyed their reputation for neutrality by taking sides.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.